If two of America's most secretive special operations units ever turned their weapons on each other, the outcome would shock most people watching from the outside. Not because of who is tougher or faster, but because the real battle would be decided long before the first shot was fired. This scenario exposes a hard truth about modern warfare that Hollywood almost always gets wrong. The idea of Delta Force clashing with Navy SEALs sounds like a test of raw skill. Popular culture frames elite combat as a contest of strength, aggression, and personal bravery. In reality, Tier 1 units are designed to solve very different problems under very specific conditions. Delta Force exists to conduct the most sensitive missions the U.S. government cannot publicly acknowledge. Its operators are selected and trained to dismantle high-value targets through intelligence dominance and precision. Every action is shaped by information, timing, and strategic restraint. Navy SEALs, by contrast, are built around flexibility and direct action across multiple environments. They specialize in rapid assaults, maritime operations, and sustained pressure on the enemy. Their strength lies in adaptability and momentum rather than quiet invisibility. If these units were forced into opposition, the defining factor would be the mission parameters. Who controls the timeline, the intelligence picture, and the objective would matter more than individual skill. The fight would be won by whoever shapes the battlefield first. Delta Force would seek to avoid a fight altogether if it did not serve the mission. Surveillance, misdirection, and precision strikes would be favored over prolonged engagement. Victory would mean achieving the objective without ever being detected. SEALs would approach the problem differently if tasked with confrontation. They would exploit speed, coordinated firepower, and environmental advantage. Their doctrine accepts controlled chaos as a tool rather than a risk. This contrast highlights why there is no universal winner in such a clash. Elite units are not interchangeable weapons. They are instruments engineered for specific strategic purposes. Strip away the mission context, and the question becomes meaningless. Special operations forces do not exist to prove dominance over each other. They exist to accomplish objectives that conventional forces cannot. In the end, the unthinkable scenario teaches a critical lesson. Modern warfare rewards planning, intelligence, and purpose over brute force. The side that understands the mission best always holds the real advantage. When people argue about which elite unit would win, they usually point to physical toughness. That assumption misses where the real separation begins. The decisive difference is how these operators are trained to think under pressure. Delta Force training is built around problem solving at the strategic level. Candidates are pushed into scenarios where there is no clear solution and no margin for error. Success depends on judgment, patience, and the ability to operate with incomplete information. Operators are conditioned to treat intelligence as a weapon. They learn to exploit human behavior, patterns, and timing rather than relying on overwhelming force. Every movement is calculated to reduce exposure and avoid unnecessary confrontation. Navy SEAL training takes a different but equally demanding approach. SEALs are forged through relentless physical stress designed to break down hesitation. The goal is to create operators who function aggressively and decisively in the worst conditions imaginable. SEALs are trained to thrive in chaos rather than eliminate it. They rehearse high-tempo assaults where plans must adapt instantly to resistance. This builds confidence in rapid decision-making and team-based momentum. The psychological conditioning reflects these priorities. Delta Force emphasizes emotional control and restraint, even when violence is available. SEALs emphasize assertiveness and initiative when hesitation could cost lives. Neither philosophy is superior in isolation. Each reflects the environments and missions the unit is expected to dominate. Training produces the mindset required to succeed where others would fail. In a hypothetical clash, these mindsets would collide before tactics ever did. Delta operators would look for ways to reshape the engagement without being seen. SEALs would push to seize control of the situation through speed and presence. Stress responses would also differ. Delta training favors slowing the fight down to regain control. SEAL training prepares operators to accelerate action until the enemy collapses. This contrast explains why comparing them like athletes misses the point. These units are not trained to compete against peers. They are trained to defeat problems that have no easy answers. The real takeaway is uncomfortable for casual observers. Elite warfare is less about heroics and more about conditioning the mind. Whichever philosophy matches the mission always holds the edge. The most overlooked factor in any elite engagement is terrain. Environment dictates movement, visibility, and tempo long before tactics come into play. In a clash between Delta Force and Navy SEALs, geography would quietly decide the outcome. Urban terrain favors those who control information and angles. Dense buildings, tight corridors, and civilian presence reward patience and precision. This environment aligns closely with Delta Force's experience in hostage rescue and counter-terror operations. Delta operators are trained to turn cities into controlled spaces. Surveillance, pattern analysis, and selective entry points reduce uncertainty. The goal is to dominate key locations without alerting the entire battlefield. Maritime and littoral zones tell a very different story. Water, tides, and limited visibility punish hesitation and reward aggression. This is where Navy SEALs are most comfortable and most dangerous. SEALs are trained to insert from the sea, operate undetected, and strike with speed. They exploit the fluidity of the environment to appear where they are least expected. Control comes from mobility rather than concealment. Rural terrain creates another shift in balance. Open spaces, long sight lines, and limited cover favor those who can coordinate movement and fire. Here, support assets and integration matter more than individual skill. Delta Force would seek to shape rural battles through intelligence and selective engagement. SEALs would likely push to close distance and force decisive action. The same terrain produces different solutions depending on doctrine. Insertion and extraction are also decisive. How a unit enters and exits an area determines risk and endurance. A poorly planned insertion can lose a fight before it begins. Delta Force prioritizes discreet access and minimal footprint. Navy SEALs emphasize flexibility and multiple entry options, often from unconventional angles. Each approach reflects deep experience in its preferred domain. This makes any blanket comparison misleading. Terrain is not a neutral backdrop. It is an active participant in every engagement. The real lesson is simple and unforgiving. The unit operating in its native environment holds a built-in advantage. Geography does not care about reputation. Elite units do not fight as individuals. They fight as extensions of a command philosophy designed to control chaos. In a hypothetical clash, leadership structure would shape every decision made on the ground. Delta Force operates with a highly intelligence-driven command framework. Missions are built around deep planning, layered contingencies, and constant information flow. Operators are expected to understand not just their task, but the strategic intent behind it. This allows Delta teams to operate with quiet autonomy. Decisions are made at the lowest level, but within tightly defined objectives. Discipline comes from shared understanding rather than visible authority. Navy SEAL command culture emphasizes aggressive initiative. Team leaders are empowered to adapt plans rapidly in response to resistance. Speed and momentum are treated as force multipliers. SEAL platoons are trained to seize opportunities as they appear. This approach values decisive action even when information is incomplete. The goal is to dominate the situation before the enemy can react. In a clash, these styles would generate different tempos. Delta Force would likely slow the engagement to regain informational advantage. SEALs would attempt to accelerate events and force commitment. Autonomy also affects risk tolerance. Delta missions are often designed to minimize exposure and collateral impact. SEAL missions accept higher visibility if it leads to rapid success. This difference shapes how teams move, communicate, and engage. One seeks to avoid detection until the decisive moment. The other is prepared to absorb friction and push through it. Command relationships with higher headquarters also matter. Delta Force is deeply integrated with national intelligence assets. SEALs are closely tied to naval and joint operational support. These connections influence what resources can be brought to bear. Intelligence feeds, air support, and maritime assets shift the balance quietly. The fight extends far beyond the operators themselves. The key takeaway is rarely discussed. Leadership philosophy determines how elite units behave under pressure. In modern warfare, command decisions often matter more than marksmanship. No operator, no matter how skilled, fights alone. Technology, intelligence, and supporting assets quietly dictate the outcome before combat begins. In a clash between Delta Force and Navy SEALs, unseen tools would become the decisive factor. Delta Force relies heavily on intelligence integration. Real-time data, signals interception, and human intelligence allow teams to anticipate enemy movements. Precision is amplified by knowing exactly where and when to strike. Operators are trained to leverage these resources without hesitation. Drones, satellite feeds, and electronic surveillance become extensions of their senses. Every movement is informed by information, not guesswork. Navy SEALs also exploit technology, but with a focus on mobility and adaptability. Advanced navigation systems, underwater detection, and joint strike coordination enhance rapid insertion and exfiltration. Technology enables them to dominate environments where uncertainty is high. Both units depend on support networks. Air cover, artillery, and cyber capabilities supplement on-the-ground efforts. The fight extends well beyond the operators themselves, into a broader operational ecosystem. Support also shapes endurance and sustainability. Delta Force may rely on minimal footprint operations with high-value precision support. SEALs may conduct extended engagements, relying on resupply and flexible staging points. In a direct confrontation, these assets would heavily influence tempo. Intelligence advantage favors Delta Force in planning ambushes or controlling critical nodes. Rapid, multi-pronged support favors SEALs in aggressive, fluid operations. Even communication protocols matter. Secure, reliable, and redundant channels allow for coordination across distance and time. Losing that advantage can turn a trained operator into a vulnerable target instantly. Technology and support are force multipliers. Without them, even the most elite operators are exposed. In the modern battlefield, mastery of information and resources often outweighs raw skill. The hidden lesson is stark. A hypothetical clash is never just about who shoots faster or harder. It is about who can see further, respond quicker, and leverage the invisible tools of war. The question of Delta Force versus Navy SEALs sparks endless debate online, but reality is far less dramatic. In truth, these units are designed to complement, not compete with each other. Understanding this reveals why the hypothetical clash is mostly a thought experiment. Delta Force and SEALs rarely operate in isolation against one another. They coordinate closely on high-priority missions, combining strengths to achieve objectives impossible for conventional forces. Rivalry exists only in perception, not in doctrine. Joint operations are the norm, not the exception. Delta brings surgical precision and intelligence mastery, while SEALs provide mobility and rapid action capability. Together, they form a force that far exceeds the sum of its parts. The Internet often overlooks one critical factor: mission context defines success. A unit trained for maritime strikes is not disadvantaged by another unit's presence. Winning is about achieving the goal, not proving superiority. Even in hypothetical confrontations, cooperation outweighs competition. Planning, intelligence, and environmental mastery decide the outcome long before bullets fly. Elite operators are trained to anticipate friendly actions as well as enemy threats. Understanding these dynamics exposes a broader truth about modern special operations. Technology, training, and doctrine are designed to multiply effectiveness, not settle imagined rivalries. Real-world conflicts demand collaboration and precision over personal dominance. The unthinkable scenario teaches an uncomfortable lesson. Any clash between Delta Force and SEALs would likely result in mutual neutralization if uncoordinated. Their true strength lies in coordinated, purposeful action. Ultimately, the question is not who would win. It is why these units exist together, and how their combined capabilities redefine what is possible in modern warfare. Success is measured in objectives achieved, not hypothetical battles won. This perspective shifts the debate from fantasy to reality. The battlefield rewards strategy, intelligence, and cooperation. Elite forces are strongest when they fight side by side, not against each other.